It's good to be with you today. Robert Wood wanted to know if I hadn't said enough already. I said, well, no, just getting warmed up. So wherever he is, hang on. 1 Kings chapter 11, where we're going to begin in our study in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to make a personal note about Brother Key and his passing. It was very sad news, and our heart goes out to you, brother, deeply. And I met him, I know it was last year or a year and a half ago. What event was he here for? Do you remember?
No More Chemo, maybe?
That's right, the No More Chemo party. That's right. Anyway, I got a chance to talk with him, and I'm not sure if I was able to correct him on his Crimson Tide business, but we get a chance to talk about that dispassionately, I might add. And so, anyway, it grieves us, but our heart goes out to you. Naomi, his daughter, left me the sweetest card I think I've ever received, and it's in my office. I'm going to probably frame it, and it will stay in my office. But it was one of the sweetest things that anyone could ever say to me, and I'm humbled by it, and it reflects, I think, a very genuine heart on her part. So we're talking about Jeroboam today, and I think it's interesting that Jeroboam sounds a lot like Rehoboam, just a letter or two here and there difference. But Jeroboam and Rehoboam remind us that when studying 1st and 2nd Kings, one of the first things we need to understand, particularly when we get to this chapter and the following chapters, is that the kings that are referred to sometimes are the southern kings and sometimes the northern kings, meaning that the nation of Israel divided into two distinct nations. Often the northern nation was referred to simply as Israel, sometimes Joseph, sometimes Ephraim, and the southern nation was referred to as Judah. And we have in 1st and 2nd Kings the list of the kings of Judah and Israel, and we also have that in the Chronicles. But again, we have those two nations, and understanding that they exist and that we're reading about different kings, and sometimes it's confusing because you'll read 2 or 3 chapters about the king of Samaria or whatever, and then you jump back in time to start over with another discussion about the king of Judah, and you're jumping back to an earlier period or maybe going forward to a different. So you just have to be aware of what it is you're looking at, and it'll take away a lot of the confusion. But we have here in our study of Jeroboam this morning the beginning of that unfortunate state, or should I say that divinely appointed state, depending on how we want to understand it. And we're going to be discussing that in just a moment. In verse 26 of 1 Kings 11, we first read about Jeroboam. This, of course, is literally on the heels of our study last week of Solomon. By the way, Carol did an outstanding job, did he not? The first time he's ever taught a class. And I was happy to hear that his wife was nervous before he taught that class, because I was scared out of my gourd. And yet, he did an amazing job. And it reflects a very thoughtful heart, and I appreciate what you had to say. And so we looked at Solomon, and of course, chapter 11 of 1 Kings begins with Solomon's wives, those many wives, who led him astray. And I'm like Carol in that regard. I believe that perhaps we're learning about things that he did in his life, experienced in his life, but prayerfully, hopefully, before his life was over, he found his way back, and maybe that's reflected in the Ecclesiastes treatise and the conclusion of the whole matter being fearing God and keeping his commandments. However, Solomon was considered to be a great king in his time, a great man, a man who was able to extend the borders of the kingdom of Israel before they divided to its furthest extent, and was able to enrich the Israelite people very much, and particularly himself. So we say that Solomon was not only the wisest man, but the richest man, and so on and so forth. Indeed, he was that. But like a lot of great men, he also had some flaws, and one of them is reflected beginning of verse 26 of chapter 11. Solomon's servant Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zereda, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. And this is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Milo and repaired the damages to the city of David, his father. The man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. It happened at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, met him on the way. He had clothed himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces, and he said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to you. But he shall have one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the people of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do what is right in my eyes, and keep my statutes and my judgments, as did his father David. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, because I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and give it to you, 10 tribes. And to his son I will give one tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself, to put my name there. So I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king over Israel. And it shall be, if you heed all that I command you, walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you and build for you an enduring house, as I built for David, and will give Israel to you, and I will afflict the descendants of David because of this, but not forever. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. So again, we're learning a little bit more about Solomon that we probably didn't want to know. Sounds a little bit like Saul here, does he not? As he has apparently learned about what Ahijah has announced in this unusual, we might say, visual effect, as he took this new garment and ripped it into 12 pieces and gave 10 to Jeroboam and said, God's going to give you those 10 tribes. I'm not sure how the word got back to Solomon. And I was asking my father about that the other day. How do you suppose word got back to Solomon? You think that Jeroboam went around announcing it? I mean, he certainly would have to know that making such a proclamation would not be popular with the king. Or did Ahijah let other people know? Because they were alone in the field when this announcement was made. So one of those two had to carry that message and give it to others. And how that happened, we just do not know. But again, note about Jeroboam. He was an industrious man, a man of valor. Obviously had good sense, good leadership qualities. And Solomon saw that in him and used it to good effect in some of his reconstruction projects. And so Jeroboam is met here and then, of course, flees into Egypt, where he remained in exile until Rehoboam was appointed king in Judah, which we'll read now in chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 1, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. So it happened when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard it, he was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, had been dwelling in Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father, his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So he said to them, depart for 3 days, then come back to me. And the people departed. So you see, Jeroboam, the ringleader, he's brought this group of elders, if you will, these representatives of the 10 tribes, and they're saying to Rehoboam, we're going to continue to follow you. We're going to be loyal to you, but we have a condition, and that is to lighten our burden. What are they referring to? Anyone? Taxes. That's what we call it, taxes. And we're paying too heavy a tax, and we're tired of paying these taxes, and so lighten our burden. So he says, give me a few days to think about it. And so he does that, and he first consults with the advisors that had worked and served with Solomon. And what did they advise him, do you remember? Do as they say. Submit to them. Ease their taxes. Then he met with the young men that grew up with him. And what did they say? They said, what my father did was, like my little finger, but I'm going to do what my big thigh would be in comparison to the little finger. In other words, you ain't seen nothing yet. So he rejected the counsel of the older men that had served with Solomon and bought into the hotheads who suggested the only way to lead these people is with a heavy hand, and you tell them who's boss. And of course, I'm paraphrasing all of that, but that's in essence what took place. And as a result, there was a rebellion. There were 10 tribes that said, depart to your tents, Israel. That's around verse 16 of chapter 12. Now, something, I don't know if you've thought about this or not, if you probably struck you while we were reading this or talking about it. But when God spoke through Ahijah to Jeroboam, God knew that what we are now reading in chapter 12 was going to happen. He knew that. He knew there was going to be a division. Now, I'm not suggesting, and I'm not going to get into that discussion about the foreknowledge of God and God, tampering with human freedom of will. I don't believe that God does that. I believe we have freedom of will. We are accountable. We do make our own choices. God may see us make the choice before we know we've made it, but he knows what we're going to do before we do it, because he's God, and perhaps he can see things that we don't believe yet have happened. I'm not sure how to explain that to you other than to say that maybe time and space are a very different thing from God's perspective than they are from ours, but I'll just leave that there. But my point is that God knew this was going to happen. And so when it happened, we say it was a terrible thing. And I suppose in a sense it was. Division always seemed to be a terrible thing. A house divided cannot stand. We don't want to see division. But sometimes division is necessary. And why would division sometimes be necessary? Okay, if someone's advocating something not right. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be reading about, when we continue, we're going to be reading about the kings of Israel, the northern nation, and Judah, the southern nation. And of all the kings, beginning with Jeroboam, that ruled in the northern nation, not a single one of them ever did the right thing. Never led God's people in the right direction. There were great prophets, strong prophets. We'll be looking at Elijah this week, by the way, in Vacation Bible School. And so probably we're not going to have him next Sunday because of the VBS thing. But again, there were many great prophets that prophesied in Israel and that did a lot of good work in Israel. But nevertheless, there were no good kings. Perhaps God saw this coming, and God wanted this to happen. He willed it to happen for the preservation of a righteous remnant. And I'm borrowing that phrase from Isaiah. There's a small righteous remnant, let's say the stump that's going to begin to grow again. That would refer, of course, to Jesus, but ultimately we refer to all of God's family, I believe. But again, let's look at it from God's perspective. God's doing this. You might say God's orchestrating it. And yet, when you read the text, what we're reading is, these are people that said, we're tired of paying these heavy taxes. We don't want to pay them anymore. And we have Rehoboam being what we would call a jerk and obstinate and stubborn. And as a result, there's this rebellion. So was this God's doing or was this man's doing? Before you answer that question, you remember what Peter said on the day of Pentecost to those devout Jews from every nation under heaven? You've taken and with wicked hands have crucified and slain the Son of God. And they did. In fact, it was Pilate who noted that because of envy, they delivered him up to be crucified. And yet, Peter would tell us later that from the foundation of the world, God willed that Jesus come into the world and die that very horrible death. Now the question is, did God make the Pharisees and the scribes lead the nation of Israel at that time to crucify their Messiah? No, God didn't make them do that. He knew they would. He knew the time was right for them to do such a thing. In fact, I believe that's what Paul imagined in Galatians 4 when he said, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth this Son into the world, born of a woman, born under the law. So again, God knows the timing. He knows the hearts of men. I don't know about you, I find it fascinating that we have true freedom of will, and yet we have God's plan orchestrated, working in concert with our will to bring about his desired end. I could cite hundreds of examples from Scripture that would establish that what I'm saying is true, that there's God's plan, but it's human beings doing what human beings do without being coerced or forced or manipulated. We're just making these choices. God just knows us well enough to know he can read the signs of the time, or perhaps God has already seen all of this happen before it happens. I mean, I'm not going there. We're not going to get into that discussion. But again, the point is that God, in his providence, allows us to continue to exercise freedom of will. That's just a fascinating concept to me. And so again, I believe God is allowing this to happen, or perhaps even orchestrating it to preserve that righteous remnant. But there were those who did remain faithful to Rehoboam and the house of David, and they will continue all the way up until the time of the Babylonian captivity. One thing about God and his providence, and I want us to all just let this sink in for just a moment. God sees from beginning to end. He sees the whole picture. We only see what's in front of us. Therefore, we are only smart when we trust him and take him at his word. He knows what he's doing. He knows far more than we are even capable of knowing. There's something else I want to mention before we continue on in our study this morning, and that is to look at the style of leadership that Rehoboam is putting on display here. In Acts, the 6th chapter, there was a problem in the church. Do you remember what that problem was? The Grecian widows were neglected. Grecian widows, meaning they were Jewish people, but they had adopted and were partakers of the Greek culture, had Greek names, that sort of thing. And so you might think there was a cultural distinction between them and the others who were not considered to be Hellenistic. But nevertheless, there was a neglect on their part. It may be because of those cultural distinctions. I don't know exactly what brought it about, but it does seem suggested in the reading that there was that cultural distinction. And so therefore, these widows were neglected in the daily ministration. And so this matter was brought to the attention of the apostles. Now, how did they handle that? Do you remember what they did to resolve that particular conflict? I'm sorry? Okay, they got help. That's true. Now, did they say, hey, give us a few days and we'll think about it. We'll go into our little conference room and we'll make a discussion about it, and then we'll come out and we'll issue our decision? Look out from among yourselves. One thing interesting to note, all the names of the men that were chosen were Hellenistic names. And so they knew they would probably be inclined to help these Hellenistic widows. And so the Hellenistic people sought Hellenistic men, and that's who they were. They were all Greek individuals in that sense of being Hellenist. So again, they solved the problem by involving the whole church. It wasn't just a top-down thing where we're going to be, the leaders of the church have decided this is the way it's going to be, and you just have to live with it and accept it. Elderships, I believe, make a serious mistake when they assume that when it comes to matters like this, solving issues, and issues do arise, particularly in congregations like this one that's growing, it's going to have growing pains. Well, how do we resolve certain issues when they present themselves? Well, we'll just let the elders decide all that part and tell it, well, I can speak for the elders and say, we don't want that responsibility, but it's more than that. I believe we have adopted a model of involving as many as we possibly can. And there's a reason for that. The more people we have involved in helping to come up with a solution to the problem, the more people we will have helping to actually resolve the problem in the long run, instead of just telling them or dictating to them how things are to be done. It's interesting. The more you study this account of Rehoboam, his poor leadership style, and those in Acts 6, I think you'll find some very insightful points to ponder, at least when it comes to leadership. Chapter 12, verse 25. We'll want to go next. So we have a division. We now have two distinct nations. And Jeroboam, now the new leader of this new nation, is trying to decide how to keep people loyal to himself. So Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. I'm in chapter 12, by the way, verse 25. Also he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, referring to Rehoboam. Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Now what does that sound like to you? How would you describe that musing in his heart? What kind of musing? Well, it's a political one, isn't it? It's politics. I got to keep in mind, I got to keep my constituents happy, got to keep them loyal to me. They keep making that trek down south 3 times a year to go to those annual feasts. Well, then likely they'll be around the people there. They'll be able to talk to the people there. They're going to see what's happening there. Things may be going better there than they are here. And so I'm going to lose my leadership. So I got to come up with a solution. Verse 28. Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one up in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. We have the northern and southern extreme. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines on the high places, made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel and offered sacrifices on the altar and burned incense. Now, you couldn't help but notice in that reading how many times the inspired writer says, in his own heart, or as he dreamed up, or as he presented, or as he did, or as he built. It's all about what he did. Now, why did he do it? Well, we've already discussed that. There were the political considerations. I got to keep people loyal to me. And so I'm going to come up with a rival religion. You ever heard of anything like that before? Do we have anything like that in the world today? When he said, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. That's just another way of saying, I'm offering you a convenient religion. A religion of convenience. And a lot of people are pursuing that. You know, when you think about a religion of convenience, I think about, I'm finding a church that preaches a message that is more of my liking. In other words, it doesn't cause me to look at myself and force me to make changes. I don't want to make those changes. I don't want to turn in the direction my life is headed. So I'm going to find a church where a preacher is preaching something that, I agree with. That's one way you could pursue a religion of convenience. Of course, here he's talking about the distance in travel. And so we might, argue for other reasons why the religion could be one of convenience. But what's really wrong with this religion? Or is there anything wrong with this religion? You got to wake up and answer that question first. It's idolatry, isn't it? Yeah. And it's a violation of the first few commandments. I mean, this is clearly wrong. It is idolatry. And where did this idol worship come from? Well, it was devised in his own heart. He just made it up. I was, a couple of years ago, we enrolled in this group. It's a Facebook group that they do some good work. I don't mean to disparage them altogether, but they're in the business of growing churches, and they're in the business of getting more people to attend your services, that sort of thing. And some of the stuff they offer is interesting and insightful, but at the end of the day, it's clear they're not thinking about what's right. They're not thinking about what is the will of God. They're just thinking about what gets more people to come and sit on the pew. And so here we've got this plan, and we've got this idea, because this is what people like. They're taking a survey, and people like this, or people like that. And so let's find a church or a religion that promotes whatever people like. Whatever happened to the idea, let's promote a religion that God approves of, that God has directed, that God wants. God is seeking true worshipers. John the 4th chapter. He wants people to worship him in spirit and in truth. He knows it's for our good. Yeah.
If that is not being done, to me, denomination is idol worship upon today.
It is.
If they're not worshiping the way God says, then they're going to take something out and they're worshiping another way.
Yeah.
So Jeroboam, looking at his own self, his own heart, we see this all the time. People go within their own heart and bring up their own ideology, their own ideas, and then try to convert the Lord into it.
That's right. I agree with you. I think that denominationalism, as we refer to that so often, is really just a modern manifestation of ancient idolatry. It's a form of idolatry because we're doing things our way, what I want and what I like, and what you want, what you like.
Like when he divided the tribe, took the 10, left the remnant of that one. Even today, it appears that we are under, I'm trying to find the word, but there's not many of congregations that's growing into our knowledge when really it is happening.
Yeah.
That the church is still constantly growing, the church is still constantly moving. But we be in a certain areas like we don't see it working that way because we don't see what God sees. I'm knowing that God would always leave a remnant in a way, one fail and the other going to succeed.
Well, I remember back in 1984, I was at Oklahoma Christian College. I heard Otis Gatewood talking about the Iron Curtain and working behind what was called then the Iron Curtain, smuggling Bibles, into the Soviet Union, that sort of thing. And I remember his text, of course, from 2 Corinthians about the triumph that we have in Christ. And he was speaking to a large audience of people there. And he said, I know a lot of you are wondering, where is that triumph? And he said, we tend to measure the triumph of the gospel based on what's happening in my backyard. And in my backyard, nobody cares. Nobody's interested. He said, but you can go behind the Iron Curtain and you find people that are hungering and thirsting, willing to die even for the gospel. You can go to Africa. And I'm sure in Bible class today, there's someone in Africa in a Bible class this morning saying, what about all those poor people in America that never had the opportunity to hear the gospel? Should we send missionaries over there? I mean, literally, the world has turned in its opposite direction. I remember as a child having those discussions about sending missionaries to Africa. Churches are growing by leaps and bounds there, and in India, and in Russia, in the Ukraine, even parts of South America, all over the world. And so the gospel continues. And so we need to be careful. Sometimes we wind up getting involved in this modern day idolatry because we feel like we're just this small group that's left and we're just struggling. And I don't care if there's just 8 of us. If we can all get on the ark, brethren, I'm on the ark. I want to get on the ark and I want to be saved. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in what the majority thinks. I don't care what the majority thinks. I want to be with what God thinks and what God approves. Again, he ordained a feast, he ordained priests, like they did in Judah. Again, false religion typically likes to mirror, in some way, imitate the true form, and that's what he's doing here. But again, it was a sin, and it set the tone in Israel, and it never changed. From this time forward, all of the kings would lead the people in a similar way. Now, chapter 13, I want to get there very quickly before our time runs out. And chapter 13, this is one of those texts that you read it and you walk away scratching your head and you just don't know what to say about it. Okay, but let's look at chapter 13. Behold, a man of God went from Judah. Okay, you got to get this in your mind. We have a southern boy going north. A man of God, that's a prophet. A man of God went from Judah to Bethel by word of the Lord. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus said the Lord, behold a child, Josiah by name. He was to be born decades later, centuries later. So this is really a great prophecy. Josiah will be born to the house of David, and on you he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord has spoken. Surely the altar shall split apart, and the ashes of it shall be poured out. So it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, who cried out against the altar in Bethel, that he stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, arrest him. His hand, which he stretched out toward him, withered, so that he could not pull it back to himself. The altar also was split apart, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. And the king answered and said to the man of God, please entreat the favor of the Lord your God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored to me. So the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him. Became as before. The king said to the man of God, come home with me and refresh yourself. I will give you a reward. But the man of God said to the king, if you were to give me half your house, I would not go in with you, nor would I eat bread, nor drink water in this place. For so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, you shall not eat bread, nor drink water, and return by the same way you came. So he went another way and did not return by the way he came to Bethel. Now, an old prophet dwelt in Bethel, and his sons came and told him all the works that the man of God had done that day in Bethel. They also told their father the words which he had spoken to the king, and their father said to them, which way did he go? For his sons had seen which way the man of God went, who came from Judah. He said to his son, saddle the donkey for me. So they saddled the donkey for him, and he rode on it, and went after the man of God, and found him sitting under an oak. He said to him, are you the man of God who came from Judah? And he said, I am. He said to him, come home with me and eat bread. And he said, I cannot return with you, nor go in with you, neither can I eat bread, nor drink water with you in this place. For I've been told by the word of the Lord, you shall not eat bread, nor drink water there, nor return by going the way you came. He said to him, I too am a prophet, as you are. And an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord, saying, bring him back with you to your house, that he may eat bread and drink water. He was lying to him. So he went back with him and ate bread in his house and drank water. It happened as they sat at the table that the word of the Lord came to the prophet who had brought him back. And he cried out to the man of God who came from Judah, saying, Thus said the Lord, because you have disobeyed the word of the Lord, have not kept the commandment which the Lord your God commanded you, but you came back, ate bread, drank water in the place which the Lord said to you, Eat no bread nor drink water. Your corpse shall not come to the tomb of your fathers. So it was, after he had eaten bread, after he had drunk, that he saddled the donkey for him, the prophet who had brought him back. When he had gone, a lion met him on the road and killed him, and his corpse was thrown on the road, and the donkey stood by it. The lion also stood by the corpse, and there men passed by and saw the corpse thrown on the road, and the lion standing by the corpse. They went and told it to the city where the prophet dwelt. The prophet who had brought him back from the way heard it. He said, It is the man of God who was disobedient. Anyway, who was disobedient to the word of the Lord. Therefore the Lord delivered him to the lion, which has torn him and killed him according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to him. And he spoke to his son, saying, Saddle the donkey for me. So they saddled it. He went and found the corpse thrown on the road, the donkey and the lion standing by the corpse. The lion had not eaten the corpse nor torn the donkey. And the prophet took up the corpse of the man of God, laid it on the donkey, brought it back. So the old prophet came to the city to mourn and to bury him. And he laid the corpse in his own tomb, and they mourned over him, saying, Alas, my brother! So it was, after he had buried him, that he spoke to his son, saying, When I am dead, bury me in the tomb where the man of God is buried. Lay my bone beside his bones, for the saying which you cried out by the word of the Lord against the altar in Bethel and against all the shrines on the high places which are in the cities of Samaria will surely come to pass. After this event, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, etc., etc. Now, I mean, we have just a few minutes here, but I do want to ask you to help me explore what in the world is going on here. I mean, when you look at this man of God, he clearly was commissioned by God to cry against that altar, and he did exactly what God told him to. And the altar split in two, and the king's hand withered, and it was restored. It to me sounds like, something that Elijah would do, the kind of signs that Elijah would be noted for. He did some really remarkable things. And here's this man of God demonstrating God spoke this message. I'm not just up here as a rabble-rouser trying to cause trouble in the neighboring nation. I'm here on God's behalf speaking God's word, and I'm going to prove it by these signs. And the king invited him to his house. I can't come there because God said, don't do that. God said, don't eat there, don't drink there. He knew full well what God had said. But then we read about this quote-unquote old prophet who heard about all this, and he runs to get him and lied to him. That's what the text says in parentheses. He lied to him. And his lie was, an angel of God spoke to me. An angel of God told me to tell you to come eat at my house. Be okay. And young prophet, okay. Now, when you hear that described that way, how does that strike you? What does that tell you about the man of God, the true man of God, the one that died? What would you say about him? He led astray. Anybody can be, right? Preacher can do wrong, Even good preachers can make bad choices. And he certainly did. He believed a lie. But, He didn't ask any question, did he? He didn't seek any credential. He just gullibly took the man's word for it. You ever known anybody like that today? Well, the Lord laid this message on my heart. Yeah, how did you do that? I was eating my Campbell soup this morning, and it spelled out, Maybe you heard some small, still voice while you're taking a shower. I mean, when did God give you this garbled message that nobody can understand? I don't know. But
like God showed respect for a person as well. God told him not to, he come telling him to.
yeah.
And still go back to this and ask the question, why wouldn't God tell me that he had changed his heart, changed his mind?
Well, what about this old prophet? What if he was a charmer? I mean, he was charismatic, and he knew how to he knew how to reason with people and he kind of hook them and reel them in, you know. So he's a good salesman. So he goes and he makes this lie, and the young prophet took his word for it without questioning him, like you said. He's gullible. And so he tells him this lie, and the young prophet believed the lie, and the young prophet died. Why? Because the word of the Lord does not change, because someone who's charismatic and someone you like and someone you love, someone you respect, said otherwise. Ultimately, what God said stands. And so you're right, brother. He is no respecter of persons. I don't care if this man did a great work, and he did a great work at Bethel. Now he dies a horrible death. Why? Because he did not obey the word of the Lord. We all are obligated to obey the word of the Lord. Yes?
You wonder if Paul didn't have this story in mind when he told the Galatians, you know, if I or an angel of the Lord preached to you another gospel, maybe he was thinking of this exact story here in the lie that the old prophets told in this occasion.
Very likely. You know, it could have been something like that. I mean, this is a fascinating read. What's really fascinating is that once the young prophet did, in fact, die, what does the old prophet do? He tells his sons, I want to be buried next to him, because what he said is the truth. He knew what that young man was saying was true. He knew it was the word of the Lord. Why did he lie to him? I don't know that. Maybe, is it possible, he was just curious. The old man heard about this southern preacher. I want to go, what's he talking about? What's he saying? So he went out to find out, and once he found out what he was saying, he was intrigued, but now he's told him a lie, and the man's going to die because of it, and maybe he had a genuine conversion experience. I don't know the answer to that question. It just is bizarre in a way, because of the way he treats the young man after his death was far better than the way he treated him in life. But he seems clearly to have accepted whatever the man said as being the truth. It's going to come to pass. By the way, he mentioned Josiah by name. He could only do that if he were inspired by God. And he was inspired by God, and yet he suffered the wrath of God because he did not obey the word of the Lord. Just instructive and interesting too. There's so much about that chapter that's not clear, although we do know that the main point of it was that altar where Jeroboam was offering incense was an unlawful and unscriptural thing, and it had to be addressed, and God sent this young man to address it. Anyway, thank you all for your comments and your thoughts. By the way, we got adult classes this week, and Brother Black will be teaching 2 of them. I'll be teaching 2 of them, and I'm not going to tell you which one they are, because I want you to make sure and be here to hear Brother Black. I know you're going to be blessed because of that. Anyway, thank you all for your time and attention.